Right. Hello, Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you for coming to listen. So the series is ABC, and the letter is K, and the topic, and the obvious topic, Krishna. Krishna. Who is Krishna? So to begin with, I'll say something like this. Krishna is God, and Krishna has, as he himself says, innumerable names, and they're all equally powerful, and they're all equally holy. So whether people want to call Krishna Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, God, or Krishna, they're all belonging to the same God. So that's a point. Now, in terms of Krishna specifically, according to the Bhagavad Gita, which is the word of Krishna, that he has brought down to earth 5,000 years ago, and that Prabhupada has translated from Sanskrit to English and brought to the West. I think let's look at what Krishna says himself about who he is, because he tells us in no uncertain terms. He tells us. So the first idea is that Krishna represents something called the absolute truth. This is a truth that is true no matter the time, no matter the place, no matter the circumstance. It's a truth that never changes. So if Krishna is absolute truth, he talks about that in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 7, where he says, "There is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread." Later on, I'll give you the equivalent ideas, the exact same ideas coming from the biblical perspective. So there is no truth superior to me. You can't have a truth greater than the absolute truth that does not change according to time, place, and circumstance. That's eternally true under all conditions. There can be no truth superior to that. So that's Krishna telling us he's the absolute truth. Let's look at a second feature, apart from absolute truth, that Krishna has created everything. Everything that we know, from our planet to our solar system, to our universe, to every other universe that may be out there. And we are told there are innumerable universes. That Krishna has created that. God has created it. Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 8, he says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Because as we know in the Bhagavad Gita, there's material worlds in which we all are, and then there's spiritual worlds where ultimately we would love to go, where we have a spiritual body. No more birth, no more death, no more old age, disease, anxiety, suffering, all those things don't exist there. So he says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. Right? So omnipotent, omniscient, creator of everything. He also says, in chapter 10, verse 41, know that all opulent, beautiful, and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. Only from a spark all of creation has sprung. Everything that is opulent, beautiful, and glorious springs from just a tiny spark. That's the power of God. Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 39, still on the creation of everything idea. I am the generating seed of all existences. There is no being, moving or non-moving, in other words, animal or plant. There is no being, moving or non-moving, that can exist without me. That can exist without me. He also tells us a third idea about himself in Bhagavad Gita, that he is all-present and all-powerful. Here we get a quote in chapter 10, verse 42. With a single fragment of myself. See, that's the same idea of before of the tiny spark creating everything. With a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support this entire universe. So not only does he create it, but he supports its ongoing maintenance. He pervades it. That means he's everywhere and he supports it. Also, he says in chapter 10, verse 20, coming to a new idea now. This idea of the Lord always being with us in our heart. God always being with us in our heart. The Bible will say the same. He specifically explains that in chapter 10, verse 20. I am the super soul, seated in the heart of all living entities. In the heart of all living entities. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings. I used to be confused about the seated in the heart part, because there's a lot of this in the Bhagavad Gita, that the super soul, which is a minute expansion of the Lord, a fully powerful, minute expansion of the Lord that accompanies us at all times, alongside our own soul that's also in the heart. The super soul knows a lot more than our soul. The super soul knows everything that there is to know, whereas our soul only knows about our own experiences. But the super soul is in the heart, and I used to get quite puzzled, because I used to think with my science knowledge that, well, there are creatures that don't have hearts per se, and like a tree doesn't have a heart, but we have a spiritual body, whether that spiritual body is now entombed in the body of a tree. All souls have a true, ultimate, original spiritual body. And when we came from the spiritual realm, which is where we came from, but because we didn't want to serve, surrender, be in that kind of relationship, but we wanted to be the boss of everything ourselves, then that's how we were sent to material existence. Okay, be the boss, run the show. I take a hands-off approach. You can run everything and I won't interfere. So that's how we came to be here. But ultimately we need to get back. We need to get our spiritual body back to our spiritual home. But the fact that that spiritual body is currently entombed in a tree doesn't mean that the spiritual body doesn't exist anymore. And we've got to stop thinking in terms of size and thinking of a small thing like a bacterium and thinking, well, how could a whole spiritual body because, the spiritual bodies are in the image of the Lord as well. The spiritual bodies are effulgent, beautiful, perfect, arms, legs, in the image of the Lord, as the Bible says too. So you might think, well, how can that possibly fit in a bacterium? We're thinking in our materialistic terms. It's so much more complex than that. And in these other dimensions, if, for example, there's no such thing as time. So our normal conventions don't work. Who knows? Maybe the spiritual body can compress to a tiny or expand. Who knows? But certainly we have a spiritual body and a spiritual heart. Not so much a blood pumping heart, but a spiritual heart. And so in the heart of our spiritual form, that is where super soul is, no matter whether that spiritual form is in a tree or not. So that's why he specifically says, I am the super soul in the heart of all living entities. He doesn't just say in humans, all living entities. So he's always with us. He's always with his creation, no matter what form you're currently in. In chapter 10, verse 32, we move on to a new idea, that the idea of God is the teacher of spiritual science. Spiritual science, that's what Krishna consciousness is about. Krishna consciousness, otherwise known as God consciousness, is a science because it's a proven technique that works. And the good thing about Krishna consciousness is that God consciousness is not a religion competing against other religions. It's not a religion, it's a spiritual science. And so if you perfect that spiritual science, you'll become a better Christian or a better Muslim. You'll become a better whatever designation of faith you're following. You'll get better at it. So Krishna consciousness as a science, not as a competing religion, but as a science, pervades all religions. So as a teacher of spiritual science, God himself says, Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, verse 32, Of all creations, I am the beginning and the end, and also the middle. O Arjuna, of all sciences, I am the spiritual science of the self. And among logicians, which is people who logic things out, I am the conclusive truth. So if one followed purely scientific, logical, and took all other things out of it and followed pure logical reasoning, which Socrates did, by the way, if you follow that pure logical reasoning, you will get to the conclusive truth. So that's quite a scientific way of speaking about it. Of all sciences, I am the spiritual science of the self. So there God poses himself as a teacher of spiritual science. So we've looked at a few aspects. Now another aspect that God describes himself as is merciful, the giver of mercy. So in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 11, let's do chapter 10 verse 10 first, since 10 comes before 11. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So that's a mercy right there. The Lord giving you from within the understanding that you need in order to return home. Understanding that you need to know how to live your life. That deep understanding he gives. And then in the verse 11, he says, to show them special mercy, I, dwelling in their hearts, that's the super soul again, God dwelling in our hearts, going with us. To show them special mercy, I, dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So there we have two verses where God is giving us the knowledge, the ability and the understanding and the knowledge of what to do to get back home. And so he's doing that out of mercy to help us to get back home. Now, another feature is the fact that God has walked among us many times. So the Bible will also attest to that, certainly with Jesus. So in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, verse 11, he said, fools deride me when I descend in human form. When I descend in human form, they do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. So we saw that with Jesus, for example, how derided he was and driven out of towns and belittled and persecuted and insulted and in the end grievously bodily harmed and murdered. So fools deride me when I descend in human form. They do not know my transcendental nature. Isn't that what Jesus said on the cross? Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. Also in Bhagavad Gita chapter 4 verse 7, Krishna says, God says, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, which is a way of addressing Arjuna, because remember he spoke the Bhagavad Gita, he sang it actually in a beautiful rhyming meter. He sang it to Arjuna. Because in those days of the Vedic civilizations, things were memorized in a sing-song form. So presented in a sing-song form helps people to remember it and memorize it. So he said, whenever, so this implies multiple times this has happened, whenever and wherever. So that implies not just multiple times has God taken human form, but in various places. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice and a predominant rise of irreligion, living a lifestyle that's got no religious or spiritual aspects to it, a predominant rise of irreligion. At that time, I descend myself. So the Lord certainly has the ability to take human form and walk among us, to try to point out the way again. And he has done it more than once, in more than one time, and in more than one place, and in more than one form, and in more than one culture. And so we certainly would put Jesus in that category. But Krishna himself came 5,000 years ago and spoke to Arjuna in human form as a chariot driver in Arjuna's army. And he also came as possibly the Buddha. And there may be others. And there's Lord Chaitanya, who came 500 years ago. And then there's also the ability for the Lord to empower certain people, become empowered by the Lord to do things that normal people couldn't do. But then he can come himself. And he clearly says, I descend in human form. How much more clear could it be? So he definitely has walked among us and can walk among us. And another idea that Krishna tells us about himself is that he really just wants our love and our devotion. Devotional service and love is what he wants, not shows of displays of great sacrifices of gold. And it's devotional love, what's in our hearts, sincere devotional love in our heart. So he says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 26, if one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. So he will accept our offerings, no matter how small and pitiful they may be, because we don't have anything. We could be the most poverty-stricken. But even the most poverty-stricken person can pick a leaf. So whether you're rich, because this was spoken in the days of great opulence in Vedic India. So there was a lot of opulence, and to this day, still in India, when people make their little altars and they offer food and flowers, they can go right over the top and have bunches and bunches and garlands and garlands and garlands of flowers and golden plates and the poshest food. But it doesn't help if you're doing all that without the genuine love and devotion in the heart. Whereas a poor guy, a beggar out on the street could just, on his little altar, his altar could be under a tree, and he could just offer a leaf. Say, this is all I have, and I'm offering you this leaf in devotion. And recognition that you're the owner of the leaf, the tree the leaf come from, the world I stand in, and the universe. And if that is done with devotion and love, it's accepted, and maybe some rich offering won't be. Because it's the love that the Lord is after. He's in no need of somebody's gold. So wants our love and our devotion. Now, in terms of knowing Krishna, we are told in the Bhagavad Gita that there are 3 ways to know Krishna, 3 kind of levels of approaching. And they become more personal and more intimate as you go along. So the first level of knowing Krishna is where one kind of sees him as all-pervading in nature, as God is love, or God is energy field, or God is intelligence. So you're worshipping one of his features in that kind of a way, and recognizing it around and seeing it in nature and seeing it in the heavens and the stars. And so you're worshipping that. And that's a start. But the ultimate goal is to recognize that God is a person. God is a personality in his own right. He has his own likes and dislikes. He has his own pursuits that he likes to do. For example, playing the flute. He has favorites. His favorite animal is the cow, which is why in the Vedic Indian tradition, cows are so revered, because if Krishna likes the cow, then we should like the cow. So the cow is a very special animal because it's like a mother to mankind. Provides us with milk, and from that milk we can make so many foods with curds and whey and different types of cheeses and yogurts and fermented milk products, and an incredible amount of sacrifice by the cows to look after humans and all the foods we can get from cows. So they're like a mother to us. They're so tolerant. So Krishna has a very soft spot for cows in the Vedic tradition. That's not to say he doesn't love all entities. Of course he does, but he's a personality, and his favorite animal is a cow. His favorite instrument is a flute. He likes to play the flute. His favorite color is yellow. He likes to wear that saffron yellow, which is why the Hare Krishna monks wear it. Because, okay, if Krishna likes that as his color, we're going to please him. We're going to wear his color. So he's a personality, and the goal is to get to know Krishna in a more intimate, personal way, not just as God is a big force field of intelligence and love and everywhere, and no form and no personality. So that's the kind of base way of knowing the Lord. And then you could go to a slightly more elevated way of knowing the Lord, which is knowing that the Lord is in your heart as the super soul, and getting in contact with your Lord in your heart, with your super soul, with God in your heart as super soul. That's another step further. And the ultimate, of course, is to know Krishna in his spiritual abode, and go there and do the activities with him that Krishna likes to do. That's called serving. If Krishna wants to have picnics by the river, then you want to have a picnic by the river. Of course you would. Because you want to please the Lord and you want to take part in his pastimes and pursuits. If he wants to dance and have flutes playing, and he wants to play the flute and everyone dances, then you will love it. It will be absolute bliss in your spiritual form to be dancing to the flute played by Krishna in his form. So that is very, very much an elevated way of knowing the Lord. A very different way of knowing the Lord, a very personal way. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord is described, his pursuits are described. And in the Vedic Srimad Bhagavatam series, there's a lot of description of Krishna's form, his abode, his activities, his likes, his dislikes, where the Bible doesn't go into that. The Bible focuses on Jesus, explaining in a relatively simple way, because maybe in that time, place and culture people weren't ready. You don't send a professor to teach university calculus to 5-year-olds. There you're teaching them 1 + 1 is 2. So what will be taught will be what that culture needs at that time. So no need to go into all that at that time. But that doesn't mean because another culture in another era who were in a different level of spiritual development got given more information, that doesn't mean that that information is wrong. That would be like a 10-year-old looking at calculus and saying, well, that's wrong because that's not what my teacher taught me, that's wrong. No, it's just a more elevated form of knowledge for a different circumstance. Nor does it mean that a calculus student would look at a 5-year-old's 1 + 1 is 2 and say it's wrong either. So there's these 3 levels. Now, the topmost personal level of knowing is called the Bhagavan form. The Bhagavan form is the one we want to get to. Now, here's a little imagery for you. If you had a train and it was nighttime and you were waiting on a hillside or a platform, and a train was coming, you might not, okay, let's not say you're on a platform because then you probably would know it was a train. Let's just say you were somewhere in the open countryside and you saw this, and it's dark night, and you saw this bright, bright light from far away coming nearer and nearer. Then that's the equivalent of the first level of knowing Krishna, because you just see the light. A lot of people with near-death experiences talk about seeing a light approaching. Not that I'm saying Krishna's a train, but this is just an image for us. So you see the light, and all you know is there's light. Then as it gets nearer, you see that there's a train. Oh, it's a train. But you can't see inside the train. You can't see the driver or the people. You can just see the train. So that's another level of knowing what's happening. It's a more advanced level than the first one where you just saw the light. This is another level of knowing what's happening. And then as the train gets nearer, you see inside and you see, oh, there's people in there. Oh, there's a driver. So that's still a higher level of knowing. So it's like that. We must not be satisfied just with knowing the effulgence, the effulgent glory of the Lord, the light. We need to try to go to the next level, which is the super soul, our own personalized expansion of the Lord that is in our heart. We need to get a relationship with that. You can't have a relationship just with light. So with our own version of the Lord, our own expansion of the Lord in our heart, we must get a relationship with that. And then we can work on the hardest one, the Bhagavan one. We're also told in the Vedic texts about the 6 opulences. The 6 opulences, and Krishna has all 6 in infinite amount. It's very interesting if you read these 6 opulences. Strength, fame, wealth, knowledge, and beauty are the first 5. There's another one I'll come to. Now, if you think about it, out of the 6 opulences, these first 5 are valued by society in general. If you think about all the people in the world who are looked up to, admired, followed, revered, almost worshipped, who do extremely well and have followers, etc., they have maybe some of these or all of them, or maybe even just one. Someone could be extremely wealthy, therefore they become kind of revered and kind of, oh, he's really made it, he's really, really wealthy, I should listen to what he has to say. Or they could have a lot of knowledge. They could be someone super knowledgeable, super clever, and so we respect them for that, and we look up to them for that. Certainly beauty is a big one. We absolutely revere Hollywood stars and Kim Kardashians and for their physical beauty. So humans know about these 6 opulences. Humans already value them, but in the wrong place. We value them on a physical level amongst our fellow humans. But every single opulence that the most famous human ever had, every single opulence, the Lord has it and more. The most intelligent human mind that ever existed, everything that human brain knew, invented, designed, figured out, discovered, the Lord already knew. And every human brain that's still going to come into this world, every genius brain that's still going to come into this world and invent amazing, incredible things that we can't dream of, the Lord already knows all that as well. These 5 that I've mentioned, there cannot be anybody with more strength, fame, wealth, knowledge, or beauty than God. He already has all of those opulences in absolute, infinite amount. But out of those 6 opulences, society is valuing only the first 5. There is a 6th one I didn't mention, and that is called renunciation. Now, the Lord is full in all of these 6 opulences. He's got the most, he's the strongest, he's got the most wealth. Of course he's got the most wealth. The Lord owns everything in creation. The richest man who owns the most amount of money, actually God owns that money. Because every single thing, every single atom is created by the Lord and held together by the energy of the Lord. The Lord owns all wealth there ever was and there ever will be. So the Lord has full strength, full fame, full wealth, full knowledge. Imagine, just imagine knowing everything that every human ever knew and ever will know. The most incredible musical abilities, Beethoven, Bach, the most incredible, the Lord already has those. He could play any instrument to the highest degree. He could conduct any science experiment to the absolute perfection. He could speak any language. You've got linguists and they, I speak 20 languages. Yes, well, the Lord speaks all of them and more, because there are other inhabited worlds in the material realm. He knows all their languages and all their knowledge as well. So he's full in all these opulences. But renunciation, society doesn't value renunciation at all, which is the sixth opulence which the Lord has. And renunciation means renouncing, not so much throwing away all your money or your house, but renouncing your ownership and your possession of it and your attachment to it. It's no good being attached to material things because you cannot take them with you. So we don't own anything. They're on loan. So it's loan, not own. They're on loan from the Lord because he owns everything. So it's useless being attached to your skills, your capacity to play a violin, your ability to climb a mountain, your beautiful house, your amazing athletic abilities, your awesome promotions at work. It's no good being attached to these things and trying to take ownership of them. You need to renounce that attachment, not necessarily the object. Don't throw your car away, but renounce your attachment to the car. Know who is the ultimate owner of the car, and be grateful that you have loan of it. And don't be attached to these things because you cannot take them with you. We are all so attached to our material possessions. Just imagine if your house suddenly got washed away in a flood, how upset you'd be. Me too. But we need to try to detach from that because you can't take your house with you anyway. So when the Lord came, let's just think in the form of Jesus. Jesus went around as a poor person. He didn't have lots and lots of possessions because he knew he couldn't take them with him. So he didn't get attached to them. So he was renounced. He had renounced those possessions. They were not important. So renunciation, society does not value at all. It's not encouraged. The opposite is encouraged. Ownership and competitiveness and fighting to defend what's yours is encouraged. Now, in terms of renunciation and in terms of Jesus, he pretty much told us, Jesus himself told us in Luke chapter 14, verse 33. The word is in here, just listen. So, therefore, whoever of you does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. That's very strong words. If you do not renounce all that he has, you cannot be my disciple. So we come to the meaning of renounce. Does it mean throw out every possession? Doesn't need to mean that. It just means don't be attached to it. It's not yours. You don't own it. You didn't earn it with your own brilliant mind, because your mind is also on loan from the Lord. So every skill you have was given to you by the Lord. So we must not be attached. So Jesus says, if they do not renounce, does not renounce all that he has, cannot be my disciple. Has to know that everything that we have, we don't really have. It's on loan. In terms of the absolute truth that I mentioned right at the very beginning, that the Lord had spoken in Bhagavad Gita, in John, John, chapter 16, verse 13, he talks about this truth. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Many people interpret that as Jesus is the only one that you must follow. That's the Christian viewpoint. Follow Jesus, that's the only way. The Vedic people would agree that following Jesus will get one home. You'll get home. You'll get back to spiritual realm if you follow Jesus, because he is one of the forms of God. He came as the Son, but he's also God among us. So no one comes to the Father but through me. But listen to the previous words that he said. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the truth. And in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord had said, I am the truth. So Jesus is pretty much saying, I am God as well. The Father, the Son, one. I am God as well. So you can't get to God unless you go through God. You have to follow the laws and regulations that the Lord has sent to us, whether he came in fleshly form as his son or as a disciple or as a devotee, which Lord Chaitanya was, or as himself when he came as Krishna 5,000 years ago. You have to follow those ways. You have to follow the absolute truth in whatever form the absolute truth has come. So with Jesus speaking in that time, place, era, and culture to those people, that was true, because he was representing the ultimate truth, and the only way to get to God is through ultimate truth. And so following Jesus for those people was their only option as ultimate truth and absolute truth. Mentioned this truth thing, mentioned again in John chapter 8, verse 32, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You will know the truth. Well, who is this truth that we're going to know? The truth is the absolute truth, is God himself. That was the first point that in the Bhagavad Gita one that I mentioned earlier. Know the truth means know God. Live a God-conscious life. And that will set you free. Not just some vague concept of truth. What about the idea of God as the creator that was mentioned by himself, his very self in Bhagavad Gita? In Genesis, of course, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there's no disagreement again. The Bible is agreeing that the two scriptures are saying the same thing. In John 1, chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. In the beginning was the Word, capital letters. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So God is in the name, the Word. He's in the name. He's the truth. He is the absolute truth, and he's in his name. God was the Word. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was ever made. That's pretty much exactly what he said in his role in the Bhagavad Gita. Nothing was made without him. Everything is made by him. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. What about the idea about all present and all powerful that I mentioned before in the Gita? What does the Bible say about that? Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. In him all things hold together. You know what that is? That's the energy that holds the atoms together. The very atoms that make this material world are held together by energies we barely can fathom. In him all things hold together. Yeah, literally holding the fabric of material universe together, the energy of the Lord. He is in all things, all pervasive, all present. What about the idea of always being with us that Bhagavad Gita mentioned with the super soul? The Lord always being present in our heart. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 2. When you pass through the water, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. That's just one small quote. The Lord is always with us. Whatever we pass through, I will be with you. And where will he be with us? Sitting on our shoulders, hiding in a backpack? No, he'll be in the heart, as the Bhagavad Gita had said. What about the mercy idea? There's the whole mercy idea that I mentioned before in Bhagavad Gita. Well, Luke chapter 6 verse 36, we are told to be merciful even as your Father is merciful. Matthew chapter 5 verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So again, the idea of mercy, parallel. Bhagavad Gita, Bible, idea of mercy. What about the idea of walks among us? Takes on fleshly form and walks among us, that I mentioned before. In the King James Bible, 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16, God was manifest in the flesh. Manifest in the flesh. Manifested himself in fleshly form. John 1 verse 14, and the Word became flesh. And we already said who the Word is, capital W. The Word became flesh. The Word is God. God is the Word. God is the ultimate absolute truth. God is the Word. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God became flesh and dwelt among us. So again, the two scriptures are agreeing on that. And the last point that I mentioned with Bhagavad Gita was that he wants our love and devotion. He wants our love and devotion. That's what he wants from us, love and devotion. The thing about offering a leaf, doesn't matter how much wealth you have, if you offer a gold plate full of beautiful flowers and food, and you're not sincere with love in the heart and devotional service in the heart, and it's not equal to the poor beggar who gave a leaf with all his love. So in Luke 21, verses 1 to 4, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had. So he valued that more, because she really did it with love in her heart to give everything that she had, however little it was. And if the beggar only has a leaf and he gives it, the Lord will accept it as an offering of love and devotion. And to finally end off, Mark chapter 12, verse 30. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. So the idea about loving with our heart, which agrees with the Bhagavad Gita. That's what the Lord wants. Love and devotion from the heart. With all our heart and all our soul. So yes, Krishna is God. Krishna has told us a lot about himself. If you want to know more about God, the Vedic scriptures have a lot of detail. None of it disagrees with what the Bible is saying, but there seems to be maybe more detail there in the Vedic scriptures. But doesn't matter what we call God. Just be conscious. We should just be conscious of God. So Krishna consciousness, the science of Krishna consciousness makes us a better Christian, a better Muslim, a better Hindu, whatever religion we follow. It makes us better at it because we must be conscious of God in our lives and serve with love and devotion. And on that, the scriptures don't disagree. So next time is the letter L. So let's see what we come up with next week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Stay well. Hare Krishna, and God bless.